Hello, my name is Michael Garrick, and this is PoppinCulture. My guest today is comedian slash film nerd Michael Clayton. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, man. I'm excited to be here.
Nice, nice. Guys, Michael Clayton is a very funny comedian. If you live in New York, Northeast, or pretty much all, I guess, the East Coast mostly you perform.
Primarily, I've been able to go out to the West Coast a little bit, but that's kind of here and there, especially the last year. That's kind of been less.
Nice, nice. But Michael is in your city, guys. Make sure you come out to see him. Very funny guy. Mike, whenever I have, is it cool if I say Mike? Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Mike, whenever I have comedians on, I like to ask, a lot of people like to focus on bombing, but I'm more focused on succeeding. So when was the first time you killed and how did it feel?
That's a great question. So it's funny because when you first start out, there are times that you do a set and you're like, man, I killed tonight. And then you have a set a little bit later and you're like, I didn't kill at all that night. I really killed tonight. The first time that I like really knew this was something different, there is a sushi restaurant called Bushido that's in West Ashley in Charleston, South Carolina. And they were having a comedy night afterwards. And I had been doing a lot of like very small open mics up to that. And, had done a couple of small shows, but nothing with like a really solid crowd in there. And I'd had, a little bit of success here and there, but I went and did a show that night and had a number of other comics that were very good comics. And in all honesty, most of the comics were better than me at that point. But it was just my night that night. I had a really good night. The crowd just was kind of with me, and I crushed that night. And it was, it's that feeling that when you first start comedy, you're like, if I can have that one day, all this time will be worth it. And then, it really just kind of it pushed so much momentum into me loving this more and to me wanting to dedicate a huge part of my life to it.
Nice, nice. Um, has anything you've done before compared to that feeling of killing on stage?
No, and it's challenging because when you try to articulate that to other people, it's very hard. For some people in the arts can understand it, like people that act, are on stage, or people that are artists and they finish a work of theirs. But like the fulfillment you get, like, I have a girlfriend and I love my girlfriend to get death, and we have a lot of great times, and but she also understands that while I do love her, the love I have for this is also something that's very, very deep and personal to me. And it's also interesting because I think it also is why comedians feel a bond with one another. Like, even if I don't like a comic, which there aren't many comics I don't like, but if you have a great set, you're seeing somebody at their happiest and you're seeing somebody at their most ecstatic. And when you see them bomb, you're seeing them at their lowest point possible. And so I always say the reason comedians have this weird bond is we all share a level of intimacy that nobody else shares with us because we've seen each other on those extremes in a way that other people really haven't.
True. Very, very true. I always say when we see somebody kill, it's the most joy you'll see. You'll see other comedians be joyful for them. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
and and killing is different from being good to the point where, like, if you're doing good, you'll still might ask your friend, like, "Hey, how was it?" When you kill, you don't ask anybody anything. You
No.
just know. Like, they'll be if you did ask, you'd be like, "Hey, why would you ask me? You know what you did." And when you bomb, it's just like I think Dave Chappelle put it the best. It's a stank on you, I believe. Like I think that's the way he said it. It's like an odor or something. It's just like, yeah, I know
It's
what
a
I did.
stank. It's a stank, and it's important to have that stank too, which is a sad thing because I've also seen people who bomb all the time and are convinced that they're constantly killing. And I wish I had that level of confidence when I've bombed, just because it would take the hurt away. But I also don't think I would be a very good comic or improve at all if I thought I was killing every single time. I think you kind of have to be hard on yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I 100% agree. Sometimes, man, you see people like you said they're bombing, but they think they're killing, and it's just like, is it confidence or delusion? You know?
Yeah, and in that moment, there's times I have like, and it has to be either confidence or delusion or a blend of both. But there are times that, like, if I've had a rough set, I almost am envious of them. It's like, man, I would love to bomb and just think that the world was like Muppets, like, that everybody is just smiling along. But I can't do that. Like, I feel a comic friend of mine, Jason Gross, I remember there was this comic bombing on stage one time, and he said, "Do you think some people can't hear the not laughter?" And that was like such an interesting way to put it. And I think he's absolutely true.
Oh man, I'm sober now. Like next week will be a year sober for me, and I had never bombed sober before. So I literally told the crowd, I was like, "Hey guys, I have no excuse for this. I just want you to know I really feel everything you're feeling right now."
I have only actually been drunk on stage twice since I've done comedy. I'm not a big drinker in general. Like I'll have a drink here and there, but like there's only been two times I've been drunk. And the first time I got drunk on stage, I didn't bomb, but I realized if anybody heckled me while I was drunk, I would fall apart on stage. Like, because I just wouldn't know how to defend it. And then after that, I was like paranoid of ever getting drunk on stage. And the only last time I was my friend Derek Humphrey. It was his going away show in Charleston, and I only have vague recollections of that show.
Okay, that's cool. I didn't think about it like that. My fear is getting too full. I know that's crazy, but like I don't like to be hungry, but I don't want to be stuffed either. You know?
I've had that. I had one time where I had an upset stomach and I was doing a 10-minute set. And about every 2 minutes, I had to rush to the bathroom real quick and run back in. Now, the bathroom was right by the stage, but that was the longest 10-minute set of my life. Um, and I don't know if you know this, it's very hard to transition your jokes back in when you're rushing the bathroom every 2 minutes.
For real, especially if you got the next comedian talking about why is this mic dry? Did he wash his hands at all? Like why? All right. But yeah, that's true. Uh one other question with Thames to comedy. You started your comedy career in Charleston, South Carolina.
That is correct.
Um what was it like the comedy doing comedy in Charleston and then now living in New York? What were like the different things that coming from Charleston to moving to New York? Or is comedy just comedy?
Um, the answer is kind of a blend. There's ways that it's very similar everywhere, and then there's ways that it's drastically different. The ways that it's similar is that the ratio of good comics to great comics to bad comics is kind of the same everywhere. If you go to an open mic, there's usually about 10% that are kind of the top tier performers, and then you have about 20 to 30 that are kind of working on it and are starting to come up. And then the rest are kind of people that are on the open mic level that have potential to go up, but they're just figuring it out. And it might be that they're new to it. There might be that they just haven't found their voice yet, but they're still kind of figuring it out. And I would say the percentages for that are pretty much true everywhere you go. It's just whether or not there's more people or not.
Okay.
So while it's New York certainly does have better, more good comics than like South Carolina, but it's in lieu of the fact that it has such a larger population. I'd say the percentage of good comics would still probably be pretty close to it. Now, I'd say the one difference is in Charleston or like a smaller market, you can be on stage 5 or 6 times a week. If you're really really hustling, and in New York, you could be on stage 4 or 5 times in a night. So if you have new material like and you're wanting to really polish it, within about 2 or 3 days, you can kind of have a definitive answer on whether or not a joke's working or not. So I think basically what I always describe it as you have way more chances to get in the gym and work out in New York. And I think that's why it kind of breeds like stronger comics. Same with LA and same with like Austin's getting up there in Chicago as well. You just have a lot more opportunity to do it. With that said, I think a market like Charleston and honestly Columbia are both smaller markets that have like really good comedy scenes. They have people there that actually care and they have people that are actually there to interested because honestly at the end of the day comedy's kind of a pauper's art form. Like and it's always been considered kind of like a working class art form. As long as you have a platform and people that want to listen to you tell jokes, you can do comedy anywhere. And I think that's where a market like Charleston and you can make money on it. You can have like really cool shows. You can have a group of people that you can really have a camaraderie with. I would never trade having started in Charleston. And that's one of the reasons I still love going back. Because not only are there still legitimately funny people there and like legitimately funny people in Columbia, but it's just a good environment to kind of build your confidence and then pursue like a larger market.
Nice, nice. I totally agree. Uh, More opportunities in New York than Charleston, in your opinion?
Yeah, yeah, there's more opportunities for it there. Now, the one thing is you do have to kind of, it's more competitive in a certain way. But even though it's more competitive because there's so many different opportunities, like if you're working hard and you're really putting in the time and you're, doing having some modicum of success on stage, you're going to get to be able to pursue a lot of those opportunities. Some of them might take longer than others just because of the prestige of it or just because of how many other talented people that are going for it as well. But New York has a lot of doors open. And the other thing is New York and LA, because of their like cachet in comedy, there's a lot of opportunities that open up to you for even like for traveling and doing comedy than if you didn't live there. I've gotten to do comedy in Boston, been able to do comedy in DC, and I would dare say, not that you can't do that if you're in a smaller market, but it's significantly an easier thing if you've spent time in a larger market.
Nice. I get your point. That's true. That's very true.
Yeah.
All right. Well, man, thank you for sharing that information with us. To get to the topic, you chose horror movies and how they influence pop culture. Um, Before we could start in general, do you have like a favorite horror movie?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have several. The one that probably always stands at the top is The Shining. Um, I think it's an incredible film. There's also a film from the 1940s called The Night of the Hunter with Robert Mitchum. Um, have you ever seen Do the Right Thing?
Yeah.
Remember the love and hate medallions that Radio Raheem has? That's straight from Night of the Hunter. He had
Okay.
love and hate tattooed on his hands. It's about a minister who basically he kills this guy and then finds out the widow knows where this like sum of money's hidden. So he woos the widow and marries her. And then it's him like kind of tormenting these two kids and like stalking them to find out where this money's hidden. And it's interesting because he's this religious figure, but he's a very ominous preacher, and the way it's shot is beautiful, and it's just a really really effective evocative like thriller type of horror film.
Okay.
um I'd also put The Thing up there. The 1980s version of The Thing is definitely high up there.
Oh, come on, man. You said which one?
The 1980s version, the Kurt Russell one.
Oh man, I know people don't enjoy it, but I do like the original, man.
I like the original too. I'm not knocking the original too. I'm not one of those people like, oh, only newer movies are better. I love a lot of the like The Day the Earth Stood Still. I love. I like the original Thing from Another World. But
I la- I laugh every time like they just let him thaw out. I don't know why. I think that's the funniest
well,
thing
they
ever.
let him fall out, and then the other thing that that movie does well, because the movie is essentially a haunted house movie, because they keep opening doors like in every other scene. So they make opening doors as mundane as possible so that when the monster finally does pop out of a door, you're completely taken by surprise, which I think is actually like probably the smartest thing the movie did is it kind of has this one plot device that it really uses to a T.
Yeah. Do you know that guy was really on fire? Like he was like they, like the actor himself. It wasn't like a stunt double, apparently.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that as well. Yeah. And fire stunts are really, really, really hard. In fact, Kane Hodder, the guy who's played Jason more than any other actor, he actually got like third degree burns on like 75% of his body because of a fire mishap and almost ended his career. And it's funny because he healed up, and you would think like after that, you'd never want to do fire stunts again. And then, like the first time he plays Jason in Friday the 13th Part 7, does a full body burn. Like, and I'm like, man, that's a guy who loves this craft to go through that and still do it.
Or a horrible agent, one or the other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we just coming out of COVID now. Well, hopefully, we can come out of COVID together, and the vaccine works, and we find out that everything go back to normal. How important do you think horror movies are when it comes to going to the theater?
I think it's very important. And I actually think it's more important at a time when there's unrest in the country. If you actually look at one of the big horror booms was in the early 70s, in like the early to mid to late 70s. That entire period, a lot of the horror directors from that time, Wes Craven, John Carpenter, Dario Argento, like over in Italy, a lot of these guys were like former hippies who were very, very disenchanted with Vietnam and stuff like that. And a lot of their horror, while it might not have been directly about that, a lot of it was kind of this. rejection of kind of what Vietnam brought. Like, for example, Last House on the Left, which is one of Wes Craven's earliest films. It's about where these hillbillies like rape and murder these two girls, and the parents exact revenge. And at the end of the movie, you're like, are the parents that much better because the way they've exacted revenge has been so much more savage? And in a lot of ways, that was a lot of commentary on us, like sending troops over to Vietnam, and then some of the actions we did against the Vietnamese citizens were just as questionable as a lot of the things we were fighting against. And a lot of times you can have commentary of that nature in film. I mean, probably the best example in the last couple of years has been Get Out, where
Yes.
Jordan Peele's movies have been incredible at kind of expressing a lot of strong social issues at the time and really addressing them through horror. And that's the thing, is horror doesn't always have to be like, okay, a masked guy's chasing babysitters. Horror can be a method to kind of address things directly in a way that if you said it just bluntly, people wouldn't be able to digest it. But if you're doing it through the form of horror, or in other cases like science fiction, those ideas are a little bit more palatable for people to digest.
Yeah. And the plot hit what you the point you just talked about. That's not even a new thing when it comes to horror at all. Like you said, like
No.
Night of the Living Dead, that's a great example of it.
Well, the funny thing about Night of the Living Dead too. So the story behind that is, of course, in Night of the Living Dead, a black man gets killed at the end of the night, and then his body's burned. It's really like, it's probably one of the few most like enraging scenes as a viewer you're ever seeing, because it's just so unjust, especially after all he's been through. But that was also an accident. Like, the reason they chose that actor was because he was the best actor among George Romero's friends. Like, they were not picking him for his race or anything like that. But it's funny, Dwayne Jones, the actor, he said, listen, people are going to take this in a racial context. People are going to view it through that lens. There's no question about it. And George Romero wasn't doubting him, but he wasn't black, so he didn't have that experience. The night that they were driving the film print over to for Night of the Living Dead to get it like edited was the night Martin Luther King got shot. And so immediately after that, they're like, okay, there's no way people aren't going to be able to see that through this context now. And then George Romero said it kind of put me in a difficult position, because after that, I felt like I had to put social commentary in every single one of my movies, because it's like, why would I do it in my first movie and not, come from this intelligent context in the others? But the first movie, it was not entirely intentional. I think some of it might have been subconscious, but it was kind of a happy happenstance of events that actually created that commentary.
Yeah. I can see that. I remember I was talking to a few other people about that movie, and I didn't think about it at the time, but like I guess like the female in the movie, they was like they made her just too weak. But I think in
Yeah.
that time period, and now when you say like it wasn't done to make a social statement, it's just but I think he made a remake of it or something else where he made her more strong. So
Yeah, the makeup artist for Dawn of the Dead, Tom Savini, he directed a remake of it, and one of their big things was is they made Barbara far more of like a formidable opponent for the
yeah.
zombies. And I think George Romero gave his approval, because he said he did feel kind of bad that
Mhm.
he gave her kind of the shrieking woman role.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm glad they were able to, fix it in some way.
Yeah, and there's actually a great book. Carol Clover wrote it in the early '90s, called Men, Women, and Chainsaws. And it's a book that's basically like a critique of horror movies, because horror movies has been critiqued as being misogynist by certain people. And some of those criticisms are valid depending on the movie. But one of the arguments she made, and it was like a feminist study on it, and there's also a great podcast called Faculty of Horror that reviews horror all from like a feminist perspective.
That's a great
But
podcast name.
yeah, and their analysis is really, really good. But Carol Clover, what she basically said is like, horror movies actually are a healthy portrayal of women in a lot of cases, because the final girl concept, of course, was perpetuated through horror. And she said the other thing is, horror is the only genre that actually acknowledges that women have a set of challenges and things that they have to fear that men do not have to fear on the same level. So it's like the only genre of film that seems to be completely honest about that. And I was like, that's a very interesting perspective. And I wouldn't have gathered that from my own like observation of it.
Yeah, I can
You
see
know,
that.
like women have to deal with getting catcalls. Now, granted, I'm not the most handsome looking man, but most men I know aren't having to deal with catcalling the way that women are. Or
Yeah,
even
shoot.
like, yeah. or even like walking to your car alone at night. And I think that in a weird way, horror movies do articulate. It's like, yeah, there's a set of challenges they're having to deal with that you're not.
Yeah.
Um, and they allow, in a lot of situations, the women overcome that too, which is, good. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't some deeply misogynistic moments in horror. There's some 80s horror movies I love that have some scenes that are like, oh boy, this does not age well in 2021.
I know the movies you're talking about too. And it's some dialogue where you go, woo, all right, that was once okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right, we don't have to worry about catcalling. I think the only way we end up getting catcalled is in prison, but we're not trying to go there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I think I'd be down on the tier two. They'd probably be like, hey, we're going to get to you when our options run out, but stay good. Like,
for our options.
yeah.
Okay. Like I said, guys, make sure you check out Michael Clayton when he's in your city. That's okay. So, but the last thing I want to say about theaters, like you say, you're a film nerd. Did you know that early on they would have like I guess fog at movie theaters, so they would have like fake skeletons, and they would just like parade them around the theater during the movies.
Absolutely. There were a lot of things that there was also like smell-o-vision where they would pump certain smells into the theaters. Like, yeah, there was a lot of different things that they did as kind of gimmicks to encourage people to get in the theater and to kind of make it a more interactive experience. I remember, I forgot what the movie was, but there was one horror film where somebody gets electrocuted with an electric chair. So somebody had put in like vibrating things under the seats. So that like when the electric chair was like, they pulled the lever, you'd feel like what felt like a shock on your seat. So a lot of movies were doing those gimmicks, but horror movies in general were some of the most popular. Some of that was also physical though. Like horror movies were very cheap to make.
Yeah,
And so like if you wanted to blow more money on like gimmicks and things like that for a theatrical experience, you were going to have a little bit more leadway to do so as well.
true. That makes sense. That makes total sense. Man, smell-o-vision. I'm glad that died off. I can only imagine if they did that wrong in the theater.
Yeah, I've heard so that Disney actually uses some of that technology for one of their rides. It's called Stitch's Great Escape
Okay.
in Disney World, and it used to be called Alien Encounter, but there's a scene where like Stitch eats a burrito or something, and then they pump the smell in, and it's one of the worst smells I've ever smelled in my life. I'm like, I don't know why this is benefiting children right now. Like,
You're right. I do remember that now. They used to have I think it was Bugs Life in Animal Kingdom, and they did the same thing.
yes,
They had the thing under the chairs, and they did have like a weird odor at one part. I remember that. Okay.
yeah, the stink bug. I know in
Yes.
like a Bug's Life, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you see a lot of that technology kind of get used in other avenues. I think with the theaters using that technology, I think the reason they all died out is they never lasted long enough to justify the cost. You see some theaters doing it now with 3D. There was a period of time where there was like a 3D movie coming out every month, and that was definitely to encourage people to get in the theaters. And then IMAX, they're shooting more and more films in IMAX, and that's becoming another way to kind of convince people to go for a theatrical experience. Which for me, being in a theater will always beat, and I love having a nice big TV at home, but being in a theater will always beat any other experience in that regard.
I can't lie, man. With COVID, I kind of don't miss it, man. I really I when I really thought about it because of COVID, I really sat at home and I was eating popcorn, and I was like, this popcorn is not $7. Like,
Yeah, there's aspects of home, like I'll say one of the things I do love about home viewing, um, it's encouraging people to watch film that they probably wouldn't have gone out of their way to watch previously. Like my mother saw Roma, the Alfonso Cuarón movie a couple years ago, and it's a great movie. But if I would have told my mom, "Hey, do you want to go to the theater and see Roma?" My mom would have never gone to see that movie. But she saw it like because it was on Netflix and she enjoyed it. And I know so many people that are kind of branching out and watching films that they never would have watched otherwise. But they're like, well, if I don't have to leave my couch, I can, commit an hour and a half to watch this. And so I'm not one of these people who like is against streaming because there's some people that are purists that are like, it should always remain in the theater. I want people to see good film and I want people to respect good film. And whether they're seeing it streaming or theater, I don't care. But I do love that experience. There have definitely been times I've had miserable theater experiences, but like some of my most fond movie going experiences have been being in a theater. One of the best examples I can remember was, you remember the awful Godzilla remake they did in the 90s?
Yeah.
So I went to see that, and it's terrible. It's a terrible movie. I watched all the Godzilla movies before Godzilla versus Kong recently. Garbage movie. But I remember when I went to the theater, it was at this theater where there was a bunch of people wearing Godzilla shirts. There were some people dressed up as Godzilla. Everybody was just so Godzilla hungry. When I went into the movie, I almost thought for a moment the movie was good because the experience in the theater was so infectious and energetic that it actually kind of made me benefit how I view the film. And I've had that with certain films my entire life. Now, some of them have been, in retrospect, bad movies, but some of them have been great films too. But the theatrical experience also like magnified that. So I would never want to completely lose that.
Yeah. Only reason why I was laughing because I remember I went with a friend and his dad. Dad's very Christian guy, very nice guy. But I remember as clear as day, he tried to whisper, but he couldn't whisper. In Godzilla 1999, Godzilla looks different. He looks more like a lizard, more humped.
Yeah.
He looks like a dinosaur. And literally, his dad said, "What the fuck is that?"
Yeah, they did a great thing. They did Godzilla Final Wars, was one of the
Yes.
Toho Japanese one, and they brought Zilla back and he kills him in like 5 seconds. And I was like, wow, that is a good choice, but that's a huge commentary.
Yeah. They're just like, this is what we think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, and I gotta say, Japan's still doing good Godzilla movies. They did Shin Godzilla, which is one that came out a few years ago, is one of the better Godzilla movies they've done.
Yeah, I don't think they're gonna bring back Jack though. I think that's one character they're like, nah, let's
Yeah.
leave him where he is. That's too much explaining now. We used to didn't have to explain stuff. Um, so this is part of the show where I like to ask a few verses, if you don't mind, and see who you think will win. Is that okay?
Sure.
Candyman or Pumpkinhead?
I would have to say, I would have to probably go with, I like Candyman more, but if I had to say who would be more adversarial, I'd probably say Pumpkinhead, just because he has that supernatural context, which Candyman does too. But I just feel like because Pumpkinhead is larger, he's more imposing, and Candyman, a lot of his actions are also kind of manipulating other people to kind of do his will through certain things too. I think Pumpkinhead might have a slight advantage. Now, with that said, I enjoy both movies, but Candyman is a far superior film.
Oh yeah, definitely. Dude,
Yeah.
yeah, Pumpkinhead. Last Pumpkinhead I saw came out on the Sci-Fi Network. I think it was Pumpkinhead 4. And like it just wasn't good. I felt bad for it because I do like the first two movies, but that one I was just like, oh man, like
Well, Candyman, it's a Clive Barker story set like in you know, in the Cabrini Green area of Chicago. Like they just such a smart approach to it. And then you have Pumpkinhead, and it's just kind of another spin on the Faust story. Like the makeup effects are amazing. I mean, it's probably some of the best work Stan Winston did in that regard. But it's kind of a run of the mill type of approach to that story. And that new, like I'll say, one of my biggest peeves this entire pandemic is I am so pumped for that new Candyman movie,
yeah,
and like having to wait for it has been agonizing.
yeah. I really hope it lives up to the hype, man. It has a great cast, so
Yeah, and the trailer looked dope too. So
that's nice. My second one for you is, and I'm sure they said the monster's name. I've seen the movie 3 times. I mean, more than 3 times, but I can't remember the name. I even watched the third one. But the monster from Jeepers Creepers,
oh yeah. Um
they gave him a
man,
name.
I forgot his name. I don't watch. I've never watched the second and third one. I have a
Don't.
problem with that director. Um, oh, you haven't heard about this?
No, no, no. Tell me, because now I need to know. It's like clarify.
Yeah,
Like, I
yeah.
didn't know.
So I saw the first Jeepers Creepers, and listen, I'm not somebody who's trying to like cancel anybody or anything like that. The director Victor Salva, his first movie, Clown House, he went to prison for a couple of years because he molested one of the children that worked on the film. Yeah, Victor Salva is a really, really scummy guy. So actually the only horror franchise that I have not watched, and I've watched every Hellraiser movie, which is not recommended because a lot of them are bad. But Jeepers Creepers is actually the only horror series that I have not watched beginning to end because I'm like, I just. He also did the movie Powder as like a background.
All right. Well, next versus.
Yeah,
Uh,
sorry about that.
nah, no
But
problem, man. I didn't, guys. I did not know this. Okay. Oh, okay. Um,
yeah, look up Victor Salva after we get
no,
off.
I'm good. I'm good. I'm good on that. I
Yeah,
take your word
it's
for it,
quite a
buddy.
journey.
I take your word for it. Wow. Man, how did he get two more? It's nobody's. It's not my business.
Yeah, I think once he got out, people were kind of like, "Oh, we'll let bygones be bygones." Which I'm not saying that if he's free, if he's free from prison, it's his business. But wouldn't have been my choice if I was in film studio.
Okay. Freddy Krueger or Hellraiser.
Oh God.
Man, I don't even
Oh
know what to
man.
talk about now. Now it's like the death penalty versus that director shit. Uh,
No, Pinhead versus Freddy is a good one. I'm gonna go with Freddy because, and I love both series. Now I'm a Freddy fanatic, but like I am a huge Pinhead fan too. If you watch the first two or three Hellraiser movies, Pinhead's not even a complete antagonist in those first two movies, and really, the third one he becomes more so. But Pinhead was always kind of more like a judge than he was a straight antagonist. The first movie, he's not the bad guy, Frank is.
yep.
And then like even the second movie, like Julia is more the antagonist, and he's kind of the one that's just kind of passing judgment for people that are wicked. Now he does become more of an antagonist later, but because of Freddy certainly has a lot more experience of actually killing people, and he's got a much more sadistic streak and has that supernatural edge too. I'd definitely give it to Freddy.
Nice, nice. And my third one, it's kind of a cheat, but I just love that. I know you're a film nerd, so I would love to get your answer. Christian Bale from American Psycho or Hannibal Lecter.
Um,
Yeah, I know it's cheating, buddy. Sorry about that, but
no, I love this question because I love both movies. Uh, I'm actually probably going to give it to um, Hannibal Lecter. Hannibal is clearly very intelligent in the movies. Um, Patrick, when you watch him, like one of the things that's interesting, if you go back and watch American Psycho, whenever he's in his office, pay attention. He never actually does any actual work at his job. And there's kind of this entire thing that he's trying to present himself as something that he's not constantly. Um, and because of that, I think he can be very sloppy in the movies. If you watch the movie, the most comical thing about American Psycho is the fact that he didn't get caught is almost farcical.
yeah,
Like, whereas Hannibal Lecter, you could be like, I get why people wouldn't have suspected this guy for so long, and I get why he's got away with it for so long because he is a deeply intelligent figure. So I would say, due to that, like I think Hannibal Lecter would easily win that one.
nice, nice. Um, but yeah, thank you for answering the verses for me, man. I just wondering because some people don't know who Pumpkinhead is. I'm sure. How would you describe him?
He's basically this figure that comes to Lance Henriksen plays kind of this hillbilly figure, and his child dies, and he basically says like, "Do you want to exact revenge on these people?" And he's like, "Yes," and Pumpkinhead agrees to kind of do it, and the guy starts to question, "Well, I didn't want this," kind of thing, and then it kind of gets out of hand. And that's kind of the general idea of Pumpkinhead is he basically comes, I'd say Wishmaster is a very similar variation too,
Yeah,
and then they're
true.
both kind of taking that like Faustian type of idea and saying like, this is what you wanted, but it's not really what you wanted. um Interesting character. Like I said, the effects are great, but I think the movie's just okay.
Oh yeah, I agree. It's definitely a popcorn flick at the end of the day. Like I think of that more than a horror movie.
Yeah, and not doesn't mean I don't enjoy them. There are plenty of horror movies that are downright horrible that I enjoy. I'm just a fan of the genre.
Yeah.
I watched Slacks the other day on Shutter. That's about a pair of killer blue jeans, and I was having the time of my life. I would not call it high cinema, but nor does it have to be.
Yes. Yes. I remember I found out about that app. Comedian Donovan Straw, dude from Columbia with me. Very funny guy, but he was just like, hey man, you need to check out it's like Netflix with nothing but horror movies. And I was like, man, how scared can I get? And then I did the free trial and I was like, it's pretty good.
It's great, and it's not that expensive. It's like six
No,
bucks.
Yep.
Like it's my favorite streaming service is probably that and HBO Max right now. They've both been putting out a lot of really good programming.
I agree. Yeah, HBO Max, that strategy they took with like getting movies like while they're in theaters, like it sounds stupid on paper, but like it's working right now.
It's working right now, and I think in a way because about half the movies they've put out have been great through that thing, and about the other half could have been better. And so I almost think it's almost been better that they released them through that. Now, like some, like I love Judas and the Black Messiah. I wish I would have been able to see that in Scream before things opened up. And like I would have probably preferred to see Wonder Woman 1984 on a bigger screen, but I was also glad I was able to see it when it came out.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Um, so you being a comedian, I could not stop. I could not do this podcast without asking you, when it comes to uh, horror comedies. Um, my favorite horror comedy would have to be Once Bitten. It's like Jim Carrey's
Oh yeah,
first.
yeah.
He's like he still has like a look.
Lauren Hunt is the vampire.
Yep. Like he still has Jim Carrey still has a little bit of his Canadian accent. Like he hasn't covered it up that much in the film. Like you can still hear it a little bit. But yeah, that's like one of my top two favorite. Do you have a favorite like horror comedy?
I have a few, but I do want to comment on Once Bitten. What I love about Once Bitten, so it's great to see certain early things from some comics because sometimes you won't see. Like I remember watching a comics come home of Dave Chappelle right before he became like Dave Chappelle, and you can see the building blocks of what would become his act, but it's not there yet. And there's a couple of like facial expressions and things from Once Bitten that you're like, that's the Jim Carrey I know, but he's not quite there yet. You could still tell he was kind of figuring out his voice. Like there's that one scene where somebody walks up on him and he turns around and he goes like that, and it's the most over dramatic use of it. There's another movie in a similar way like that called Vampire's Kiss with Nicolas Cage, where he thinks he's been bitten by a vampire, but the movie kind of makes you question whether he actually has been or not. And that movie is very funny. But my favorite comedy horror movies, Cabin in the Woods was spectacular. Um, that was really, really good. Of course, the Evil Dead trilogy is fantastic. There's an 80s slasher parody called Student Bodies
Yeah.
that's actually really good too. But those are all really, really good horror comedies. It's funny too, horror comedy. So the first horror movie that was ever made was like a 3-minute horror movie that George Méliès, the guy from Hugo, made called House of the Devil. But shortly after that, there was another guy by the name of Smith who made a couple of horror movies. And the first one he made was called The X-Ray Fiend. And it was a movie that came out like 2 years after X-rays were made. And he used like X-ray shots of people to like be kind of creepy and stuff. But that was a horror comedy. And so they had horror comedy as a genre like in the 1890s. Um, so horror and comedy, because they share a weird parallel, horror and comedy in a weird way. And I think that's why when people were shocked that like Jordan Peele being like a comic was making horror films, I'm like, I'm not shocked at all. Same thing with Danny McBride working on the latest Halloween. Or you had like John Krasinski making A Quiet Place. I think people that have a comedic sensibility actually do get why horror works.
Exactly. Can you imagine like Anthony Johnson making a horror movie?
I don't know. I guess Cannibal Holocaust is the best I can think of. Just a more funny version of that. I would just think of like, what's a movie that could almost not get released in the country, and that would be like the movie he'd make.
Exactly.
Um, but yeah, like I think that like the whole comedy sensibility and the horror sensibility are not that far removed. Um, but yeah, I think those are terrific horror comedies. Um, I also think like my favorite movie, The Shining. There are so many moments in The Shining that are hilarious, and I don't know if they're meant to be hilarious or I don't know if it's just kind of accidental. Like there's a scene he's in the bathroom with Grady, and he goes, "You a family man, Grady?" And he's like, "Yeah, yeah." And my family's, and he's like, "Nah, you brought your wife and kid up there, and then you chopped them into little pieces." And Jack Nicholson's just nodding his head, and then you have that awkward silence. Like it looks like if somebody that wrote on The Office like did a pound of meth and decided to write a bathroom sequence. It's got this really awkward approach to humor to it.
Very, very. Wow. Yeah, I never thought about it that way, but you're right. It does. It does. It
Yeah.
does. Um, when it comes to parodies, you like Cabin in the Woods, some people consider that like a close to parody, which it isn't a parody, it's its own film, but it does like play off the tropes, you would
Yeah,
say. Um, my second favorite is like well, horror comedy is Scary Movie 2. Of course, anything
yeah.
past Scary Movie 3, I can admit they're not great films. But when it comes to like Scary Movie 1 and 2 and many other horror parodies, uh, do you believe that they're like very like decent movies when it comes to making fun of something that is taken too serious sometimes when it comes to horror?
I think the key to making like a good horror parody, the reason the first two scary movies work and then they start to have diminishing returns after that is they would actually do bits revolving around what could be kind of exaggerated in each of the movies and be funny. And then later on, those movies just thought that referencing certain things was funny. Like the best example of it was Disaster Movie, where they're like, "Oh, look, it's Iron Man," and then they just have an asteroid fall on them. And then I'm like, "Well, there's no real joke there. You're just throwing rocks at a pop culture figure."
Yeah.
Like, you know, I mean, a perfect example is like in Scary Movie 2, the scene that they parody from Scream 2, where the knife is stuck through his head, but in that they have like a penis. Like, it's a juvenile joke, but the reason it works is it is referencing something, it is exaggerating that very thing, and then kind of having a bit to go with it. And
Yes.
there's, tons of examples of that in the first two Scary Movie movies, which is why I think they still kind of hold up as being pretty funny films. I also think, you know, comedic performers make a big difference too. Anna Faris is really good in those movies. Like she's genuinely funny, and I think she gets it.
Yeah.
Um, and I think like a lot of the supporting actors, I think Marlon Wayans is funny in both of those. I think the guy who plays her dad in the first movie is fucking hysterical. Like you have comedic performers that get the timing, and as those movies went on, they kind of replaced the comedic actors with like B-list actors who
Yeah.
were needing work that
Yeah.
didn't understand comedic timing.
Yes. And I like the fact that they knew it though. Like they knew it. I think Soul Plane literally came out and then Kevin Hart was in like the next scary movie.
Yes, yeah. Now Soul Plane is hysterical.
Yes.
Like it is. I've never seen a movie that had a more preposterous premise and works completely just because they lean into it so hard. I loved it. And once again, the comedic performers get what's funny in it. Even the actors who aren't comedians, like actually, what's her name? The one from Modern Family, the
I know the
gorgeous one.
I know the face, yes.
Yeah, she's in that, and she's very funny in it. But I think they utilize her in a way that, like, even though she's not like a typical comedic actress, she can. Although she's hilarious in Modern Family too, I think they managed to use everybody in a way that actually magnified their strengths and hid their weaknesses and that type of thing.
Oh yeah, it's definitely one of the things where it's like it's good that they didn't try to take it serious. Like they treated it like a parody should be treated.
Another good one recently. Did you see The Hunt?
Yes.
Yeah, The Hunt I really liked, and I liked it because it doesn't try to side with either like liberals or conservatives kind of thing. It kind of had fair game with the faults of both, and I thought it brought up like good arguments for both. And it was funny because I'm a very liberal guy, but like I have a good friend of mine who's like a devout libertarian, and it was great going to that movie because I saw it the day after he saw it, and we could not be more far apart on a lot of political issues. But pretty much everything about that movie, we're like, "Yep, that's pretty damn good."
Yeah. If you remember that trailer that first came out for the movie, like that had a lot of people upset. Like that, like the trailer did not portray what you saw in the film.
No, well, the problem I had with that too is anytime somebody gets upset about a movie or book before it even comes out, like and before they've actually had a chance to see it, that always drives me nuts. Because the people that were originally protesting it, is they were saying, "Oh, it's a movie about hunting Trump supporters," and I'm like, but if you watch the movie, the people that are hunting them almost get made fun of more than the people that are getting hunted. They certainly have some like fun at Trump supporters' expense, but like very very far left people get trashed in that movie too.
Yeah.
Like it certainly spends equal side times bashing both sides. So the fact that like a lot of like diehard Trump people were like, "This movie's like," I'm like, "This movie's kind of backing you on a few things." Like it would be interesting if you saw it, you probably would walk away having a different opinion. And then it's funny because when the movie ultimately did come out, nobody had anything bad to say about it because once they saw it, it was not the controversial film they thought it would be.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it was just good marketing. Like I think I think
Yeah.
they made the trailer that way for more people to see it, and it worked for them.
So yeah, that was done by Bloomhouse, and Bloomhouse might have one of the smartest movie models right now. You know, most horror movies, even if they do poorly, make around 30 to 40 million dollars at the box office. You know, they just do. Um, so Jason Bloom, he basically said, "I'll make your movie, but it has to be like $10 million or under." And because of that, he rarely has a movie that doesn't make a profit. Like I think Get Out was done for like $5 million, which is not that much money at all, and that grossed like 300 million, which is clearly a very profitable film. But you know, let's even remove like Get Out. Let's take a movie like Truth or Dare, which is an objectively terrible movie that they made. There's nothing redeeming about Truth or Dare as a movie. It's terrible. It cost about $2 or $3 million and it grossed about 80 million. So like it's been just a very Truth or Dare grossed about $80 million.
I feel bad for those people, man.
That you feel bad, but at the same time, like it's one of the reasons Bloomhouse has been so successful. And most of the movies they make are good. Like Happy Death Day is a great movie. It's a lot of fun. And it's very, if you want to talk about horror comedies, that's a great one.
And the sequel
Um,
holds up too.
yeah, the sequel's really good too. I hear they want to make a third one. I hope they do because I think that actress has got charisma for days. I mean, she's so funny. She's very likable in the movie. I think she's fascinating. But yeah, Bloomhouse has kind of hit on this perfect business model where they can let people really take risks as long as they can work within that budget. And there's almost like no risk to them because horror movies are going to make a certain amount of money no matter what. So as long as you keep it under that, you're pretty much going to turn a profit.
Yep. And my last question for you, when it comes to a horror movie that says based on a true story, how much do you really go, okay, all this happened?
Um, 5%.
Yeah.
you know,
Yes.
I mean, the best example of that is the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which that movie is a masterpiece. It's one of the better films in the genre. It's still one of the best things I can say about Texas Chainsaw Massacre as a horror film. Every time I watch it, I have to take a shower right after. And there's no real blood in Texas Chainsaw, the original Texas Chainsaw. Not really. There's nobody getting cut up. It's all kind of in your head more than anything else, but it's just such a great, filthy, kind of grimy movie in the mood for it. But if you read the story that inspired that, the story of Ed Gein,
Yeah, man.
Ed Gein didn't have a sadistic family. Um, he maybe killed two people, which is still awful, but it's not this like mass murder, image that they want to give. He did use body parts for, furniture and stuff, but it was primarily grave robbing. Like he had lampshades that were covered with human skin. He had skulls on the end of each of his bedposts, which out of all the disturbing things, I do have to admit that's kind of metal. But like he had a bunch of really disturbing things in his house, but a lot of it was he was more of a grave robber than a murderer. Um, and so they took elements of that. And actually, his story is pretty much the basis for Leatherface and Texas Chainsaw, for Buffalo Bill and Silence of the Lambs, and for Norman Bates and Psycho. They all drew some level of inspiration from his story. But yeah, most of the times when they say something is based on a true story, it's either not true at all or only has like a grain of truth. Emily Rose, it's the same thing. And Emily Rose is probably a little bit more accurate than Texas Chainsaw is, but they still took a lot of liberties. Um, you know, the best use of that ever, I still think, is not even a horror movie. It's in Fargo, because Fargo portrayed itself as a true story, but that actually was kind of a plot device because when you're watching it, you're treating it like it's a serious drama, and then everybody talks in this funny accent, and you're like, this shouldn't be as funny as it feels it is because this is very comical. So that was actually done to kind of almost trick the viewer more than actually trying to sell it as a true story. But yeah, true stories in horror films. The fact of the matter is, you don't want to show a lot of the, like, for example, they just did a Ted Bundy movie a few years ago.
Hmm.
you don't want to show all of the actual violence that Ted Bundy did because it's disrespectful to the victims, so you want to make it more of a character study. So like that's the risk of doing like a true story of somebody really heinous is, you do want to tell what's clearly a fascinating story, but you want to have reverence for the victims. The reason horror movies can be fun is that it's a victimless crime. Like if fantasy figures are dying, then it's like, okay, we're all having a roller coaster ride. Nobody's getting hurt here. It's a simulation. When you start crossing that line over to reality, that's where you can have a disconnect with the audience.
Exactly. Like when it comes to fantasy, we can make any character be a horrible character. They're like, you know what, they're gonna die. We know they're gonna die. They've been horrible to everybody in this movie. As soon as the slasher shows up, I'm pretty sure they're gonna be one of the first people to die. But when you tell a true life story, maybe this person was horrible, but we can't, they died, they're a real person. We can't say they were horrible. We have to keep, respect.
It's also one of the disconnects that people have with horror fanatics. They assume that they're all kind of these like disturbed, kind of sitting in the corner, thinking of killing people and all that. Here's the funny thing: I've gotten to meet a lot of horror filmmakers. Most of them are vegan. Uh, they're very, very pro animal rights, which I think is beautiful. Even though I love meat, like I think that's very admirable. Um, like myself, most of us are very, very against the death penalty. like and like actual violence I get very, very uncomfortable with. like i remember I remember just scrolling on Facebook. Remember one of the beheading videos?
I,
um
I heard about it. I didn't see it, but yeah.
I didn't want to see it, but somebody had posted it on Facebook, which I think is already just not okay, just to post that on like a public forum and I accidentally see somebody getting beheaded. But
Oh, I
like
would
I
have
saw it.
friended him.
Yeah, I quickly defriended. It was somebody I met through comedy, like an acquaintance or somebody, and I'm like, I don't need to see that again. But I ended up seeing that. Like, I went to the bathroom and I like threw up. I was like very, very uncomfortable with seeing that because I don't, the idea of somebody actually getting hurt is horrifying to me. And I find that actually most people I know who are diehard horror fans are actually kind of very sensitive souls. Um, and I almost think that the fact that most horror films end with somebody triumphing over a very difficult opponent is somewhat of the appeal of those movies too.
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy. Your unfriended story is way better than mine. Somebody spoiled Infinity War, and I was like, unfriend.
Oh, you know what? Completely worth it. Completely. I'm like, I don't need that kind of negativity in my life.
I literally saw him like a year after that at Walmart. He was like, "Hey, Mike," and I was still mad. I was like, "Oh, bitch." I just kept walking.
So I
Um,
remember when MySpace was still around, and the Half Blood Prince Harry Potter book had come out. A guy I knew stayed up reading the book the entire night, and 12 hours after the book came out, he changed his or not 12 hours, but probably about like 16 hours later, he had changed his profile name to Dumbledore dies on page 596. And when you went over to his page, the number of like hate posts he got, I mean, they were funny because they were insane, but like the hate was real. like, yeah, trolling does bother me because it's just the lowest form of comedy. um I always joke that people that troll, it's the digital version of, hey, look at my dick. like there's no skill in there's no skill in doing trolling. You're just going to say the opposite of what people like. How profound.
that's a perfect example of what it is. That is 100% what it is. Like
Yeah,
that's it. Um,
yeah. And like, is a guy yelling look at my dick kind of funny? Yeah, but I wouldn't call him a comic genius.
yeah, I definitely wouldn't say this is art.
Yeah.
Well, man, thank you so much for coming on the show. Is there anything you'd like to say to your fans?
I mean, it's such a sweet thing to even say that I'm glad that anybody enjoys watching my comedy. Um, there's two reasons that I got into comedy. It's one, I wanted to be able to make people laugh, but number two, I just love being around comics. They're my favorite people in the world. They're all crazy, myself included, but I love that about them. I had an ex girlfriend who one time referred to comics as kind of the island of misfit toys, and she said that in almost kind of a derisive way. But after we broke up, it's like, yeah, not only are they the island of misfit toys, but I kind of appreciate that about them. I feel it's just a really well curated group of souls that I get to do comedy with, and I just love talking to other comics.
Hey, buddy, when you make it, well, you're making it big. But when you make it even bigger, like you make sure you send her that text message, like I'm the king of the island. Um,
That's
uh,
very sweet of you, man. I appreciate that.
no problem. Where can they follow you on social media?
I'm on Clayton Comedy at on Twitter, and you can go on me on Facebook. I think it's the same handle on Instagram as well. Um, but I'm on all three of those, and I primarily comment on Facebook and stuff. But I like to post a few things here and there on Instagram as well, and I like to keep abreast of things on Twitter. But I love talking to anybody that's wanting to chat.
Cool, cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, and you guys have an amazing day.